We're looking today at European street photography in the 1930s and the idea of the decisive moment. When we're looking at street photography from this time, according to the authors of our textbook, what defines street photography from this period is the search for a visual mode expressive of modern life, its change, speed, and resulting alienation. Now, in the early years of the 20th century, modern street life itself is changing very rapidly. You're seeing automobiles taking over the streets that had previously been dominated by horse-drawn carriages, and that's changing how people feel and how people behave in public. So, photographers are interested in capturing this transition. This photograph by Lartigue shows some of the qualities that people were enjoying in this early street photography. This combination of human life and activity and the mechanization and speed that are facilitated by the automobile. In this photograph, you notice this sort of graceful lines that sort of create harmony between the tails of the woman's extravagant fur coat and the curves of the leash that attaches her form to the shapes of the dogs. Then you get up close and you can see these details of the sort of worried looking expression on the dog's face, and the peculiarly haughty and distant expression of the lady that's sort of distanced from us by the form of the lace veil. Those elements of just like observation and capturing the things that are happening around us in the world and capturing those in photographs, that's really exciting in the early 20th century. Now, something else that really importantly sets the 1930s street photography apart from what had come before is the influence of the surrealists. It's the surrealists like Man Ray who believed that what mattered in a photograph was much more than what meets the eye. So, this photograph by Man Ray uses solarization, it's deliberately posed, it's like the opposite of street photography, but it shows the efforts of the surrealists to capture the unconscious and the sort of strangeness and peculiarity of the world and bring that to bear in the photograph. So it was Man Ray and his protege Bernice Abbott who brought Atget to a broader audience with their interest in his photography. Bernice Abbott was a street photographer. Man Ray was a surrealist, and his interest in Atget's photography had to do with the sort of strangeness of what Atget captured in the street. So, photography up until this time hadn't really focused on these kinds of uninhabited places. They would focus on people, make connections with people. But the people who show up in Atget's photographs are like ghostly figures. We're not led to make connections with these people. And the strange relationship between the viewer and the place that we see in Atget's photograph was what really captured the interest of the surrealists, the sense of being deserted. Walter Benjamin described Atget's photographs of street scenes as being like the scenes of a crime. And then in these street scenes, Atget is capturing things, the objects that you see in shop windows and the reflections that combine different areas of space. He captures things that people would pass by on a daily basis but wouldn't have noticed before. So he takes things that are around, turns them into something that we can stop and think about, but they seem strange and they seem unsettling. So this brings us to the idea of the optical unconscious. In Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, he uses this term, and he says that the film camera introduces us to unconscious optics, as does psychoanalysis to unconscious impulses. So in photography, it's the capability of the camera to freeze moments and capture unexpected compositions that show us things that we may have seen but not known that we were seeing. Photography can bring to light the strangeness of the world. Versailles is one of these photographers in the 1930s who's inspired by that capability of street photography to capture the strange, and he's especially interested in capturing the true darkness of night. So Versailles is a photographer of the nighttime. So in many of Versailles' photographs, he actually poses his subjects, and what you see here, the couple of I guess they translate it as two street toughs. They look intimidating, they look threatening, particularly so because they look like they're sort of peering around the corner of a building, like you're in this sort of dark alleyway and you're encountering these kind of threatening looking fellows unexpectedly. It so happens that Versailles manipulated this image in the darkroom in order to get this composition that really enhances the feeling of being trapped in a dark place. So nightlife in the form of people out in bars and people socializing, and love and romance and seduction feature prominently in Versailles' photographs. He also used a lot of mirrors to capture different perspectives on people, and they sort of suggest by seeing the sort of face reflected in two different ways, you sometimes get two different looking facial expressions, like you do with the lady here, and that sort of taps into that sense of surrealism and strangeness in the image. Now, a tool that had a greater influence over photography from this period than any other was the Leica camera. Starting in the 1920s, Leica started producing these small cameras that used 35 millimeter film, and they could be taken out into the world. You could focus them, you could control the exposure of your photograph, so you could really control the quality of the photograph, compose it intentionally, and you could be anywhere you wanted to be and capture things that were moving. So that hadn't been possible before, and with the Leica, it's possible. So this brings us to the work of French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson. Now, this is a photograph that's in our book, and it's something that would not have been possible to capture with a larger, more cumbersome camera, because you can see that the people in the photograph don't know that they're being photographed. They're being captured in a way that's not especially flattering. They're in the middle of having this picnic, and the lady on the right it must be a very hot day. She's taken off her blouse, so she's just wearing the camisole that would have been under the blouse, and it's a kind of casualness that kind of what wasn't considered really proper in the society they were a part of. So this is read as having things to say about the working class and the sort of free time that was going to be available to them, and things that they would do with that free time. So it's read according to our text in terms of its social connections. But look at what's possible in terms of vantage point with this photograph. Okay, because imagine where the horizon line is, right? Cartier-Bresson is aiming his camera downwards. Okay, he's standing on a hill and he's looking down a fairly steep hill right into the water. And this is something that would have been really awkward to try to capture with a bigger, heavier camera. So the sense of gravity sort of pulling these large bodies towards the water is part of what makes this picture click, what kind of makes it all seem to make sense. And that vantage point and the moment that are captured are all made possible by the small handheld camera. This one photograph, Behind the Gare Saint-Lazare in Paris, by Cartier-Bresson, really encapsulates a lot of the qualities that are so masterful in Cartier-Bresson's work. So it's a street photograph. It's captured with one of these small Leica cameras. It uses repeated elements in a way that pull the photograph together and make it feel cohesive and complete. Okay, the pieces click, they all seem to work together. There's a strong sense of repetition and rhythm. There's a clear sense of balance. So look at the fence in the sort of upper middle ground of the photograph. See how the fence creates a sort of a horizontal band across the middle. It's reflected in the water, so the fence looks slightly different in its in its upper version and in the reflected version, right? So it's repeating there. there's repetition of the fence. There's repetition of a male form. Okay, so we see there's a sort of shadowy man in the center of the frame, who's reflected in the water. There's a sort of stack of rocks separating him from his reflection, and then in the foreground towards us, probably the first thing that you saw was this man who's sort of stepping off of this what looks like sort of a walkway that because of the water he's sort of like using it to sort of like get across as much of this enormous puddle as he can, and his heel is just about to touch the water. Okay, so what's going to happen when his heel touches the water? It's going to create ripples. It's going to just like break up all of those reflections. So it has this sense of being captured so immediately and so precisely. It's just like this one split second where everything clicks together. All of those reflections are just so beautifully balanced and organized, and in just a split second, it's going to be gone. There have been a lot of things written about this photograph over the years about what it signifies and why people found it so meaningful and kept going back to it and looking at it over and over again. And one of the readings has to do with the broken wheel. Look at the repeated round shapes in the picture. You'll see circles that are incomplete, circles that are broken, and they happen over and over again in the shape of the poster of the dancer that's sort of pasted up as a poster in the upper left-hand area of the photograph. There's a sort of circle that's sort of cut off, and then there's this shadowy dancer shape there, and the dancer sort of echoes the form of the man whose heel is just about to touch the water in the foreground. But the dancer in the poster is in a sort of a broken circle shape. There are these sort of broken hoops that might have come from barrels or something mechanical. We don't really know. Towards the front end of the photograph, there's this sort of ripple that's around the wooden walkway that the man is sort of jumping off of. Round sort of C-like shapes repeat, and the sense of there being a circle that's broken in later years, later in the 20th century, when people would look back at Cartier-Bresson's photographs, they see this photograph as being a sort of symbolic of the run-up to World War II and to the crisis and rupture that's created by World War II. And that's a lot of symbolism to see in a photograph that predated the actual war, but that's what it means to see these things symbolically and to read it like the surrealists do, because they're looking for how the things that we see in a photograph can mean more than they were intended to mean. It's not about the intent, it's about what we end up seeing in it.